Hi, everyone. We are nearing the end of the pilot study. It's very exciting. This last video is just going to quickly revisit the pilot study assignment and then talk about what needs to be in your conclusion and discussion. So I don't have any slides. I just have the assignment, and then I'm going to go over an example. So just to kind of revisit, this assignment gives you your headings, all right? So everything in bold here are your headings. Now, if you remember in your introduction for the pilot study, I told you you could have all of these things together. However, I know for your Qual 2, you need them to be separate. Either way is fine for your pilot study, but these should essentially be in the introduction. You should have something for each of these, and it should be revised, of course, based on my last round of revisions. In your literature review, again, remember you just need a paragraph of introduction and then a bullet point for each area with a little bit about what that area is going to do. I think this worked fairly well. Your theoretical framework needs to be a paragraph or two, just so I know what that theoretical framework is about, because it helps me then give you feedback on your findings. And then the methods, this is very important. Don't forget to have each of these areas. And again, each of these areas, each of these headings is going to be very helpful for your qualifying exam. So do not forget. So a couple of things about your methods. Your methods needs to be put into past tense, and it needs to be rewritten, particularly the participants and the instruments and data collection will need to be rewritten to reflect what actually happened. So don't just put it in past tense. Like if you are stating, for example, I will interview 3 preschool teachers, whoever I can find using snowball sampling, that's fine in the beginning. But now when you turn it in the final, you are going to need to state, I interviewed 3 preschool teachers, but, and you might have used snowball sampling, but now you actually have to say who they are. I interviewed one teacher from this school, one teacher from that school. You can use pseudonyms, or for this class, you don't really need to, because this will not escape the class. Here's how I found that person, etc. Right? So you would want to really be specific about who you found, what you did, what kind of data you collected. And if it was kind of a journey of data collection, in other words, if you tried this and you tried that and so forth, you can definitely relate the journey. In some ways, your methods is a story. It's a story of what happened, right? Now, your analysis paragraphs, I've given you a video. There's a video with how to write those, and I gave you an example in class. So be sure to write that up. If you want me to take a look and give feedback, please let me know. And then, of course, strengths and limitations and positionality. There are a couple of you who still have not done those sections. Findings, remember there's just one paragraph that summarizes your main themes. So we looked at this in class when we looked at specific articles. How do authors summarize their main themes in that introductory paragraph? That's what you need to do. And then choose one theme, so one heading, essentially, which will give an overview of that theme. You will probably introduce several sub-themes or sub-codes. And then for each sub-theme, you will give evidence, you will make a claim, and you will give evidence. And then, of course, you need to interpret or analyze those quotes or that evidence, all right? And then a paragraph in which you tie that theme to other themes. And just, to kind of make an attempt to talk about how themes are interrelated. Okay, I'm going to talk about your appendix. Oops, this is section 6 and section 7. And references. Your appendix should be, your data collection protocols. Do not forget these, because this is part of your grade. Should be in your pilot study. Also, your references. Now, I do not want you to go through extra work making perfect references for your pilot study. Just use a reference list that you are going to use for your qualifying exam too. All right? Okay, back to the discussion and conclusion. There are 3 main parts, and this will become really useful, hopefully, as you do your dissertation also. You want to summarize your findings, all right? So in your case, it will just be one theme, so it may not be very long, right? As you summarize your findings, you will want to discuss how those relate to your theoretical framework and to the existing literature. And I'm going to give you an example. Sometimes people do this separately. They have their findings and then they have how it relates, and sometimes they blend them. The example I'm going to give you sort of brings these two things together, and you'll see how it works. Then you'll want to talk about the implications. You'll want to write 1 or 2 paragraphs about what the findings mean for practitioners. Particularly, I would like you to divide it and make sure that you have practitioners in the context that you're researching. In other words, what should people do right now that you are, in contact with, and in general. So that means, like, what does this say in general about how folks should be changing their practice? So in one example, maybe, how should folks specifically address collaboration with parents over IEP plans in the particular context? In other words, what changes need to be made directly in the context that the research was being done? And what is the recommendations from the research for people who are trying to do equitable approaches to IEPs involving parents overall? And then provide some next steps. Well, in that context, I mean, it's not a then thing. While you are doing that, provide next steps or call to action. So what are the actionable recommendations? So those two things are concurrent. They're not one after the other, okay? Now I'm going to give an example that should be familiar to you. This is the Hayes et al. Paper that we've been kind of deconstructing. So you know a little bit about the theory here, you know a little bit about the findings. I'm going to talk about the discussion. In class, we should have gone over kind of how theory was used in the findings in this case, and then a little bit maybe about how the theory comes back into play in the discussion. But here I'm going to talk about exactly how this discussion does all of the things in the assignment, okay? So you see here where I've typed some theory, some lit. So some means summary. So this is where I summarize the research. Theory means where I make a reference to theory. Here's summary again, where I summarize the research. And here's lit, where I refer to the literature, okay? And I'm just going to go over a little bit of it. All right. So in the beginning, I just have one broad overview sentence here. Okay, and then I start right into the quantitative findings. From a low initial starting point, teachers showed the greatest gains in subscales pertaining to NGSS SE practices, as well as integrating stewardship. And then I gave the specifics. So one of the mistakes people make is give general findings, like teachers gained in doing NGSS practices, without giving at least one kind of example from the research. So you don't want to give like a quote, but give an example of something that, something concrete that supports what you're saying here. Then I refer to the literature. Many PD efforts demonstrate much smaller effect size in relation to shifts in practice. All right, so I'm saying, hey, this is actually pretty cool. Okay, now moving on to the next paragraph, I say, we framed our study with Clark and Hollingsworth's theory that teacher change happens through an iterative process between original beliefs, etc. So I'm saying, hey, reader, remember that theory that we used to introduce this whole study? All right, and then I say, we wanted to refine this theory, and so we measured initial belief alignment, which demonstrated a relatively high alignment between teacher beliefs and institutional philosophies. So that is a summary. That's a summary of the findings. All right, now I tie it back to the literature. The important role of previous belief alignment in facilitating uptake of new practices reflects an ongoing discussion in the literature. And then I cite people. Okay, so I talk here, I bring the theory back in, I summarize the findings, and then I tie it to the literature. Okay, now skipping to another, I just want to give you another example. Here, I say, although Clark and Hollingsworth model, this is a theory, substantively contributed to our understanding of teacher change, our results gave rise to additional mechanisms that refine and complement their framework. So I'm saying I'm actually going to inform theory with this work. You may not want to inform theory. You can, of course, but maybe you just say that your work is in alignment with that theory, or your work makes clear that that theory is useful for understanding something, right? So maybe you're looking at pedagogic voicing like Narian, and you would just want to say, hey, the use of this idea of voicing is just useful to understand this thing, all right? That's one thing that your work demonstrates. So then I go back to my work and I give a summary again. In the second process, teachers reference the important role the Institute played as a source of new information that helped change their conceptions about teaching and expose them to additional pedagogical tools and environmental issues. Notice that I sneak in my 3 sub-themes here. So I give a little bit of detail. Then I tie it to the literature. The important role of new ideas to complement existing expertise has been documented elsewhere, as has the role of environmental literacy in fostering EE instructional practice. So I'm saying, hey, this is in alignment with the literature. Every now and then you say things like, this adds to the literature, or this pushes on the literature, all right? And then it goes on. Again, in this one, I have the summary first, and then the literature, and then theory. And in this case, I'm pushing on theory, right? Although not explicitly referenced in the Clark and Hollingsworth model, our findings point to these things. Okay. Now, scrolling down, all of this stuff is that summary, theory, literature. Now we get into theoretical implications. And again, you may not want to do this you don't have to do this in your pilot study, but I wanted to pull your attention to it, that we contribute to this dialogue. I pull together, how do we inform theory? We contribute to this dialogue by applying Clark and Hollingsworth theory, and we test and refine their theory. And then I have points 1, 2, and 3. So I'm pulling together for my reader, here are the 3 ways in which I am suggesting we should modify this theory. And then the implications for practice are a little bit closer to what I'm asking you to do, right? So these 2 paragraphs state, well, what should practitioners take away from this? And I say, the results demonstrate the power of programs that infuse relevant pedagogical and environmental knowledge, strategies, and tools. Holds teachers to high expectations and simultaneously provide high support and provide opportunities for teachers to reflect on student learning. So I'm actually pulling out 3 of the key elements of the findings here in terms of, hey, if you're going to do a PD program, you should think about these things. And then I have a paragraph that's about a slightly different topic, which is that integrating stewardship and science may be a really important opportunity for getting environmental education into schools, because I am, in fact, writing to an environmental education audience here. Okay, so that's all I wanted to just kind of unpack a little bit what this actually looks like and give you an example. You may also look to other articles as an example, although I don't recommend using Narian in this case because she does most of this in her findings. All right, good luck, and well, I look forward to seeing these soon.